Grief is a way of loving. Kelly Barnhill says, grief is love that has lost its object, but I don't think that's it. Because the person that we love is never really gone. We still see them and smell them and talk to them and hear them. So how can they be gone when we're still loving them? Grief really is as simple as a way of loving. But I don't mean to suggest that it's easy. It's probably the hardest way to love of all. But we only grieve for those that we love. And how lucky are we to love so deeply that when someone we love is gone, it hurts. Grief is also an emotion that demands action. We express our emotions, and some emotions are so big that we can't help but move to thrust them out into the world with our voices and our tears. And it helps when we are learning how to carry these big emotions to have something constructive to do with that urge to move. And you see, to me, this is the gift of natural burial. The grave must be dug, the body carried to the grave. Hand over hand, the body is lowered into the ground. And then, shovelful by shovelful, the grave must be filled. And we do this work to give the body to the land, to return it to the place that it came from. It's all action. It's an act of love. It's also an act of service. In bodies, our life, or in life, our bodies are containers. And in death, what is contained is set free. And after death, the body can no longer serve the life that it contained. And so we give the body back. In service of the body and our grief and the planet, we give the body back to the land that it came from, that sustained it in life in order to sustain the life that will come after it. It's a pretty extraordinary act of generosity when you think about it. In the 11 months since opening Vermont Forest Cemetery, I have tended the forest that houses it through the cycles of the seasons. Our first burial was in October, and the leaves were just glorious with color, but they quickly fell. And our next burials were in stick season and deep winter, when the land seemed quiet, but we all knew that under the earth, life was waiting. When spring finally came, my husband and I, we work at the cemetery, and we watched these leaves come up and turn green, and we realized that everybody that we had buried before that was a part of those leaves, quite literally. And so I have watched now in the summer, the graves that are in the suns become riots of ferns. I mean, just everywhere, ferns have come up. And graves that are in the shade have small saplings, and they've been growing, stretching towards the sunlight, even in the shade. I've watched the life that has come from these dusts flourish. And now that cycle, here we are in September, begins again. But the new life isn't the only thing that has come from the burials. The people that have chosen burial in our forest have given their bodies back to the land. It's a way for them to caretake the forest, but it's also a way for them to care for the people that they leave behind. It's a way of loving them. So I like to say that Vermont Forest Cemetery is a living memorial to everybody that will be buried there. And that part of my work as the head cemeterian is to make sure that people's stories become as much a part of the cemetery as their bodies do. And it is, and I absolutely do that. But another way of saying that is to say that the forest itself is a living act of love for those that visit. Whether you are coming to mourn or simply to be in the woods, the forest is there and thriving because of those that we have buried. People really like the idea of becoming a tree when they die. But I wonder if they realize that that tree will love the world the same way they did. And this isn't just a metaphor. There's more and more research that shows that trees care for one another. The mycorrhizal network that connects the trees to the mycelium of the fungi, and those fungi are fixing nutrients into the soil that everything needs to survive. If one tree is sick, healthy trees will shunt nutrients to it. If there's a tree that is in danger, it will signal to healthy trees that they need to take precautions. And there's some data that suggests that there's a species bias, and it's only trees of the same species that do this for each other. But there's other data that suggests that it's not. That the forest doesn't see itself as a group of individual species, but as a community, and it supports the community as a whole. Natural burial is something that takes community. It can't be the work of just one person. The communities that I have seen coming together to support people when they're choosing to be buried here are really beautiful. Sometimes they've been families, but other times they've been groups of strangers, and other times they've been groups that include volunteers like Pam and Charlie who came to support a family going through this. This fall, we buried a man. He lived far away, and so his family didn't think they were going to be able to get back in order to be at the burial. We have a volunteer list, so we sent an email out and we said, can you come? Can you do this on behalf of this person whose dream it was to be buried in our forest? And a dozen people responded. It was amazing. And so they came, and some of them we knew, a lot of them we didn't. Some of them knew each other, but most of them were strangers to each other. 6 of them carried his body to the grave. And his family ended up coming in the end, but the action that was demanded of them by their grief was to bear witness. And so more of them lowered his body to the grave, into the grave, and then his family, he was a poet, so they read a poem that he had written, and they offered the poem to the grave. And then in near silence, we worked together to fill it in. And then this winter, we buried a man who had never known his family. So he was an orphan. He even had to name himself. He had no idea where he came from. And he claimed he had never had a dream in life. But as he was dying, he dreamed he became a shepherd in the Green Mountains. And so his widow was Googling places to bury people in the Green Mountains, and she found us. And we buried him, and we buried him in our part of a forest that was a sheepfold in the 1800s. And it's high on a hill where we can imagine the shepherd standing and overlooking his flock. So now he tends our flock of souls at the cemetery. He is our shepherd. And in life, he was a ceramicist. His wife wanted to create a memorial for him, and she reached out to his studio mates and some of his students that he had taught pottery to, and she made them a big batch of chocolate pudding. She'd never met them while he was alive. His pottery work was his own thing. And so she brought them chocolate pudding, and they brought a bottle of red wine, and they sat around and they told stories about him, and they discovered him together for each other, and they designed a clay memorial tablet that they're going to place over his grave, and over time that will disintegrate and go back to the soil along with his body. This spring, we did a burial for a man whose family was fractured by trauma. I mean, they grew up hard, and they came together. Some of them were strangers to each other. To bury this man, even if only at a distance they had been able to love him, even if they hadn't spoken to him in a decade. They shared his favorite songs, and we danced together in the forest, and they shared stories about him from the times that they had been a part of his life. And they left united by this way that they had come together to honor the wishes of the one that had died. And they were a new family, and they knew this man more completely than any of them had before. And one of them turned to me as he was leaving and said, I think in choosing this, my brother wanted to teach us how to grieve. And then this summer, we buried a woman who had struggled in many ways with motherhood, with how to be a mom. And as she died, her daughters cared for her at home. And in doing so, they finally found this softness that had eluded them as a family. They found a new ease in loving one another. And after she died, they chose to prepare her body together after death. So they bathed her and they anointed her in rose oil, and then they wrapped her in a shroud that they had made for her that was covered in flowers. It was really beautiful, and they kissed her forehead. And when they buried her in this beautiful shroud covered in flowers, they covered her grave in living flowers. It was this mound of flowers, and for like a week walking by, all you could hear was the buzzing of the bees that were visiting these flowers on her grave. It was really beautiful. And it really made me realize that natural burial is a way for us to take care of each other, to love each other beyond the limits of life and death, here, not here, human, natural, physical, metaphysical. So it's just this way of loving. And I talk a lot about reciprocity, so people that have heard me talk have heard me use this word a lot, but it's a concept that I never really appreciated as distinct from gratitude until a couple of years ago when I was reading Braiding Sweetgrass by the indigenous scientist Hogle Acciavatti. And as she writes about reciprocity, she's reflecting about how all things come from death. The food we eat, the materials we consume, nearly all of it comes from something that was once alive. And it had to die in order to be useful for us. And that's really sobering and profound and beautiful, but also overwhelming. I mean, how can you possibly say, thanks for dying so I could use you in a way that really honors that sacrifice? And so in writing about reciprocity, Hogle Acciavatti actually absolves us of that responsibility. We don't have to say thank you, she says. We have to live our appreciation. She uses the example of food. So she's saying, don't just chew your food, savor it. Taste it, feel it in your mouth, and know the ways that it's nurturing your body. It's sustaining you. And best of all is to share it with others, those you love, but also those in need. And just be generous with this deep satisfaction of nurturing. And when you cook, to remember that you're not just preparing food, you're making it possible to feed others by something that you yourself created. You're making love manifest in a pot of soup. And we are really busy these days, right? We are so busy and we're isolated, and it's really hard to find the time to remember that there's more to life than what we accomplish. The only thing that truly, truly matters in life is not what we do, but how we live. And really, that is to say, how we love. So, in a year of running the cemetery, I have decided that my goal in life is to live in reciprocity with the gift it is to be alive, to really be present with what is, to pay attention on every level to what's being offered to me in each moment, to accept what comes in those moments, and to let each moment be enough. And of course, I fail at this. I fail spectacularly at this every day. But I really like to think that my mom wasn't lying when she said, it doesn't matter if you succeed, it only matters that you try. And so I try again and again to stay curious, to notice joy, and to practice hope. Because what is that if not love? Living in reciprocity with life is a continual act of love. And see, the cycle begins again because natural burial is also an act of love. So there's a spot in the cemetery that I have chosen for myself to be buried in. It's actually the second spot I've chosen, but this is the real one. It's on a hillside, and it's overlooking a stream, and it's in the shade of this ancient birch tree. And this tree is so old that if I'm lucky enough to live a long and full life, which is what I'm planning on doing, the tree will not survive long after my death. But trees grow up as they live, and then as they die, they grow down again. And so I like to think that even though it's at the very end of its life, my body will ease its final descent before it too returns to nourish this forest. And I like to think that as it grows down, someone might come along, maybe my child, maybe a stranger, and lean against it. And they'll listen for the call of the hermit thrush and feel the wind moving in the leaves and look for brook trout in the stream below. And it will be like getting a hug from me. Look, I'll be saying, isn't this life glorious?